Hey, let's do some more photo animation.
Movie boy! Dun, dun, dun.
Hey, welcome back to part 2 with Moovieboy. Value statement, call to action, tagline. Oh, and if you didn't watch part 1, go watch part 1. It will make a lot more sense because we're just diving right back in for part 2 of how to animate your photos using Photoshop and After Effects. Here we go. Here is another shot, and you can basically see what we've done here. We have our foreground element, which is this side of the street and the poles. We have a background element of the street and this studio back there. And then, of course, we have our midground element, which is this little car as it moves across. Now, some of the more advanced techniques you can add to even add more pizzazz to your photos are to add things like particles and smoke, or composite in other shots, or even use 3D elements for those of you who really want to go to town on this. In this case, I wanted just a little bit of that old diesel gas, popping out of this old car. Here is our original historical photo. Here's me cloning out different stuff so I could break off eventually the foreground. Same process as before. All right. Then I've got these cars. There's that one, and there's that one. Because originally I thought I might have cross traffic working its way through. This car just didn't line up. So essentially I had to cut out this car, and since it was originally a parked car, I kind of needed a driver in there. So I went through other historical photos again and found a driver that, I'm not doing the airplane part anymore. I've got my driver, of course, in the furthest back layer for the car. I've got the body, and then I needed to separate out the front wheel and the rear wheel so that I would be able to rotate these. And then also I didn't cut out the rear tires because I would just replicate these tires back there. All right, so all this was built up and then brought into After Effects. Let's break this sucker down. There's our foreground. There's the car shadow that I built in, and I'm really not going to get into that right now. Then, of course, the driver from the Photoshop. Here are the back wheels that I have done a curve adjustment on so that they appear more like they're in the back and shadowed, since this would be the underside of the car. So I did a just simple curves adjustment on it. There's the body, and there is the front tires. Now all of this was connected to layer 6, the car body. So wherever the car body went, the other items followed through, so I didn't have to separately animate each piece or watch pieces get left behind. The other thing I did in here that is a more advanced technique, so there's an emitter here, a little spotlight, that is what I have emitting. Wow, the emitter is emitting the smoke particles. And we're not really going to go into that. There are plenty of tutorials to talk about how to create smoke in After Effects. But as you can see here, it's just creating that little cloud trail as the car moves across the frame. So that is the close-up for that. Ooh. Let's go from camera 1 to a custom view. And again, same kind of work. The car is just moving along here. We have our foreground. We have our background layer pushed back, but then scaled up so it fits the original dimensions of the original flat photo. Just a couple of layers, some smoke particles, and a car with rotating tires. That is that one. Now we move on to more advanced ones like this one right here. We have a couple of streetcars moving along, and as you can see, the more sophisticated parts are trying to make sure that as it scales up in a way that it's staying on track, and that up here it's generally following the line here. And then we have these shadows. We have one here as it passes through this shadow here. It comes across and then clears out. And then on the opposite side, we have this shadow coming across the gentleman here as this trolley goes on by. Now, if you look real closely, this doesn't work so well on here. We only worked it out for that part. The shot, I think, actually ends before we get to this point. But as you can see, we have some complex stuff. And you'll see why as we go over here into Photoshop to look at the original historical photo. And as you can note, we have several problems here. We have people that are in the way here at the front. We have the label here, but that's not a big deal to remove. We also have this one that I want to remove, and as you can see, there are people here as well. The head of this horse. All of this is complicating matters if I want those to be my moving parts. So here was our original. And step one was just to clean and remove, as you can see here, remove the labels. As you've seen in my other video, and if you haven't, go check it right now, I talk about working, healing the background behind an object. So as I explained with that one, something that helps this process is to get rid of parts of the image that will contaminate the background. If you want, in this case, I want to start working on the buildings that are appearing behind the streetcar. I need to rebuild this whole section here. Well, if I'm using the techniques of filling it with content-aware fills, it'll be grabbing people and horses and other carts and try and merge that into the buildings, and that will not help. So I removed a lot of the elements here. And actually, let's clear off these layers so you can see how this was cleaned up. So all the items I didn't want to contaminate the buildings were removed. One of the first things I started to do to get these buildings behind the streetcar rebuilt was to simply just take elements that I had here and clone them again down here. Now, as you can see, we do not have that great of a match. It helped more for adding these awnings and the general underneath, but as you can see, this building does not match this clone at all. Same problems here. And of course, I still am going to have to deal with the fact that I have all these individual humans. Some I could leave in place as long as it didn't look too obvious that I was cloning them. But little by little, I was patching and cloning using the tops of the building here below just to start fleshing this out. In the case of dealing with the streetcar, we had to start cloning out different parts of them. And again, using a lot of the same techniques of stamping, cloning, content-aware fills, everything to slowly rebuild a clean front of this. So this is kind of a final of the clean backdrop. Again, not 100% perfect here, but I knew the train was going to be intersecting at different points. This part just was not working. So again, as in our previous pieces, I started to look at other photos from the time. And basically, I was searching through these shots, seeing if something large enough existed where I could take part of the building and use that to patch on to the other one. So here's a photo, another photo from our collection, and I just decided these awnings and this horse here would be a good thing to add. So, let's see. There they are. Now, of course, the contrast is wrong there, so I did a correction on that to help it blend in a little bit more. And then same here. From another photo, reworked bits of it in, and again, then did a curve adjustment to get it to blend in, if we want to look at that real quick. It's just basically the blacks were too deep, so just brought that up and just created that there. And then I only needed it to apply to this part, so there's a layer mask on that. So now I can have my clean rear streetcar and my clean front streetcar. All that was brought back into here. We have our clean backdrop as from the Photoshop image. Let's sew out the front streetcar shadow. All this is really is I took the original streetcar, this layer here, duplicated it. Let's turn off all these effects. Let's back it up. Back. And voila. The shadow was essentially by setting the streetcar from normal to multiply. So now you can see it's just darkening things up. So then I did a corner pin. So each of these corners basically sheared and brought down the perspective of this. So now it was working along the ground plane. And then I need to fill it with a gradient ramp so that I would go from this dark color here to a light color there. That way the shadow would fade out as it moved across. I added a displacement map that just used the clean background as just a general layer to give it a little bit of disruption. So at least it looked like as it progresses through that it would react a little bit to the underneath image, just enough to give it a little bit of a subtle distortion as it moved through. And then I give it a bit of a blur, just a touch of a blur. And now you can see that was moving through. And as you can see, it is locked and parented to the front streetcar. Now, as far as the shadow where it breaks across these guys, I basically did the same thing. So again, let's solo this out on the background. So you can see it coming across here, but as you can imagine, it's a lot of the same things. In fact, I just duplicated that layer and brought it up here. So we've got it set on multiply again. The opacity is down to 72%. I've got a blur. The displacement map is now set to the men instead of the ground. Let's just zoom in even closer on these two. So it's just that same shadow, only now it's just straight up and down, moving right across. And as it's using as an alpha track mat the street men up here. So there's a duplication of this. You can see the whole outline of the street men here. And then this is a duplicate that, if I solo that I simply am using as an alpha track mat. That means that, you know, wherever this shadow intersects with this outline, that's where I want the shadow to show up. So it just moves across with the streetcar. So if I turn on the streetcar, as it comes across here, it just throws that little shadow onto them. Now, of course, I could have done that to everyone here, but the shot I knew was going to cut really before it even got that far. And let's turn on the other shadow while we're at it. Shadow. So there we go. Now the same stuff for the most part was done on our rear streetcar, only this time it enters a period of it getting lit. So there's our streetcar and the shadow, same technique. But then I need the horse's head here to be also cut out. And there, the little horse head when it actually goes behind it. So it's the same thing. And it just comes out of a shadow. So this shape here is here. Now we can see the outlines. All it is literally just a shape layer that just has the same effects as the other streetcar. And it moves along and covers up what I needed to cover up as it's passing through the plane of this shadow along the ground here. It moves through, and then I need it to kind of reset and then come off of it as it comes out. And that's how we eventually end up with this. Moving on, we have here a far more complex thing, although it's using the same principles. In fact, at its heart, this one is just working with this photo here. What we wanted to do for an establishing shot is we wanted to take this aerial view, and if you can see here along this road, to have a car of our characters who are driving cross country. As we push in, we see the car appear driving across the road and eventually coming to this studio. This was going to be obviously more complicated. There isn't a pre-existing car. I mean, granted, there's these little dot things, but I wanted to work with something that looked a little better in motion. And then, of course, we had all these buildings. But since we don't really have foreground elements here, and we don't have the parallax and other items to really cause movement in here, I had the crazy idea of actually rebuilding the studio in 3D. So let's go over here to Blender. I literally, using camera projection, worked on a way of rebuilding the studio. And let me change this to a wireframe mode so you can see they were just very simple boxes put together and the image is projected onto it. It still has some of the same restrictions. You can't have the camera go too far one way or another. Otherwise, as before with the golf shot, you'll start seeing where the image has been stretched. So, you know, you can see it looks really distorted once you start going out there, but this would allow me to have the camera move far deeper and not look like the photo starts kind of looking off as you zoom in. The problem was, once we brought that in, we brought this model in as an element 3D. So let me just bring that up. This is that completed model, fully rendered out. And like I said, if you go too far, things start looking a little off. But this does allow you to do a little bit more than before. This is on draft textures, so it doesn't look that good. But this does point out why eventually we moved away from this. You can note as you get in really close here, you can start to see seams showing up where the geometry and the flat plane that created the ground starts to join up. When it's out this far, you can't really tell, but as you got close to it, the director could see the seams. And there are techniques that I could have done to redo the textures, but by then, he just thought it might not need all this complex stuff. It was a good idea, but let's just move forward and just do this as a flat 2D plane. Because anyway, your eyes were supposed to be going more towards this other 3D model. So I just found this little Model T car that was going to be at such a distance. But, you know, even at times when you are thinking no one's really going to notice something, if you can find that thing that gives it just a little bit added realism that even at a distance just feels a little bit more like a car, in this case, go for it. So had this model, brought it in. As it's moving through, it's leaving a little dust cloud behind it. You can see that here. Let's solo that out, the dust and the car. Moving on through. You can see the emitter there. It just moves through the frame, works its way down the road, and just that little detail there, just something to catch your eye as we do the final shot. I'll show the final shot right now. Ooh, smoky. But again, if you want to see how to use that kind of projection, you can request that, and I'll maybe do that on a future video. So there. Do not forget to comment if there was anything that was too confusing or something you want to see added. Let me know down below. Also, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And hey, I gotta stop doing that. That is loud. This is my one from the vaults today. It is the alien from the claw of Toy Stories 1 through 3, and I guess probably in part 4. I have a number of them back here scattered all about, and I think I even have one still in the bag because I used to get a lot of cheeseburgers at the Burger King across the street from where I worked, so I kept adding these to the collection. But yeah, one's still in the bag because I'm that kind of a nerd. But hey, that's why you come here, so thank you so much, and come again.